At 5 a.m. on November 12th, flames shot 2 meters into the Taiwan sky. Not from a forest fire, not from an industrial accident. From mud. A mud volcano in Wandan Township had just erupted for the 11th time in 3 years, sending methane-fueled fire dancing against the pre-dawn darkness while residents watched from what they hoped was a safe distance. But this wasn't just another geological curiosity for social media. Scientists studying the accelerating pattern can no longer call this normal. Because when you map 11 eruptions against 3.5 years of seismic data, when you track the shortening intervals between events, when you measure the increasing pressure beneath Taiwan's restless crust, the data reveals something far more unsettling than burning mud. It reveals a system that's accelerating towards something no one wants to predict. What triggered the alarm and new data revelation? The eruption began the way they always do, with the earth speaking in whispers before it starts to shout. Residents near Huangyuan Temple in Wandan Township woke to a low, persistent rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. By 5:15 a.m., the whispers had become screams. Li Mei-chen was feeding her chickens when the first vent opened in her neighbor's field. "It sounded like a giant was breathing underneath us," she would tell reporters later. Within minutes, 3 separate vents had torn through the farmland, releasing a cocktail of mud, water, and methane gas that ignited on contact with air. The flames reached 2 meters high, casting an otherworldly glow across the rural landscape. Local authorities arrived expecting routine damage control. Taiwan's southwestern coast hosts over 20 mud volcanoes, and periodic eruptions are part of life here. But when Dr. Chen Wei-ming from Taiwan's Central Geological Survey began cross-referencing the timing with recent seismic data, a pattern emerged that made his team stop and start calculating backwards through months of measurements. 2 days earlier, Bailechu, exactly 48 hours before the eruption, a magnitude 5.3 earthquake had shaken Kaohsiung at 1 p.m. local time. The epicenter was 72 kilometers from the mud volcano site. Strong enough to rattle windows, but not unusual for Taiwan, where tectonic plates collide with relentless force. What was unusual was the precision of the timing. Dr. Chen pulled up the Wandan site's activity log, 11 eruptions since 2022. The intervals between them had been getting progressively shorter, the intensity had been getting progressively higher, and now, for the first time, they had documented evidence of what locals had suspected for generations. These eruptions weren't random geological hiccups. They were responses to seismic triggers, and the response time was getting faster. The November 12th event opened 5 separate vents, more than any previous eruption at the site. Methane emissions were 40% higher than the largest previous event. But the most unsettling discovery came when Chen's team expanded their analysis beyond the immediate site. 3 other mud volcano locations across Pingtung County had shown increased gas emissions in the 72 hours following the November 10th earthquake. This wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a regional response that suggested underground systems were communicating across distances that challenged existing models. But that's only the beginning of a much larger story unfolding beneath Taiwan's surface. Explain what's happening geologically and physically. To understand what's happening at Wandan, you need to understand that Taiwan exists because 2 massive pieces of the Earth's crust are locked in a slow-motion collision. The Philippine Sea Plate drives westward beneath the Eurasian Plate at 7 to 8 centimeters per year. That might sound gradual, but in geological terms, it's a high-speed crash in perpetual motion. This collision creates what geologists call an accretionary wedge. Imagine 2 cars hitting head-on, but instead of stopping, one car keeps pushing, and the metal keeps crumpling upward. That process built Taiwan's mountains and created a subsurface maze of fractured rock, trapped fluids, and pressurized chambers extending kilometers beneath the surface. The process begins 3 to 5 kilometers underground in sedimentary formations that were once ancient ocean floors. Under immense pressure, groundwater becomes superheated and chemically active, mixing with decomposing organic matter to produce methane and other gases. When tectonic stress fractures the overlying rock, which happens regularly in Taiwan, these pressurized fluids have nowhere to go but up, unlike magmatic volcanoes, which require molten rock from deep in the Earth's mantle. Mud volcanoes are driven entirely by physics, pressure differential, fluid dynamics, and the search for equilibrium. The eruption is really a pressure release, with underground fluids following the path of least resistance to the surface. Recent research published in Science magazine has documented how seismic waves can trigger mud volcano activity across hundreds of kilometers. The mechanism involves dynamic triggering. Seismic waves temporarily alter the stress state of underground fluids, reducing the pressure that keeps them contained. For a few critical hours or days after a significant earthquake, mud volcano systems become hypersensitive. In Taiwan's case, the November 10th earthquake generated seismic waves that reached the pressurized chambers beneath Wandan in minutes. Those waves temporarily reduced the overburden pressure, the weight of overlying rock that normally keeps the fluid system contained. For 48 hours, the Wandan mud volcano existed in a state of reduced containment, like a safety valve with a loosened spring. The methane component creates the spectacular flames. As the mud-water gas mixture reaches the surface, dissolved methane separates and forms gas bubbles. Upon contact with oxygen, these emissions ignite spontaneously, creating flames that can persist for hours until the gas supply diminishes. Satellite interferometry reveals another troubling dimension. The ground around Wandan Township is rising at 10 to 12 millimeters per year, representing ongoing crustal deformation driven by subsurface pressure buildup. Advanced GPS stations measure this uplift with millimeter precision, creating a real-time map of how underground forces are reshaping the landscape. Taiwan's entire southwestern coast exists in continuous geological tension, with over 20 active mud volcano sites serving as pressure release points for a much larger underground system. When one site erupts, it can temporarily relieve pressure locally while redirecting stress to neighboring locations. The November 12th eruption was just one valve opening in a hydraulic network operating at geological scales. Yet what makes this pattern truly alarming isn't what's happening now. It's what happened before. Recall past patterns that mirror current data. The residents of southwestern Taiwan have been living with mud volcano eruptions for centuries, developing an understanding of patterns that modern science is only beginning to quantify. Li Mei-chen's grandfather kept a handwritten log of mud volcano activity from 1957 to 1994. The faded notebook contains entries like third eruption this season, earthquake coming soon, and ground quiet for 2 months. Something big building. His intuition proved prophetic in 1999. Throughout 1997 and 1998, mud volcano activity across southwestern Taiwan had intensified dramatically. The Wandan site erupted 6 times in 18 months, unprecedented for a location that had historically been quiet for years between events. Other sites showed similar patterns. Local residents reported increased gas emissions, new hot springs appearing overnight, and rising ground temperatures. On September 21, 1999, the Chi-Chi earthquake struck central Taiwan with a magnitude of 7.3, killing over 2,400 people and becoming the island's most devastating seismic event in recorded history. The correlation between the preceding mud volcano hyperactivity and the massive earthquake was too strong to ignore. Not causation, seismologists emphasized, but correlation powerful enough to reshape how scientists thought about earthquake precursors. The historical pattern extends beyond Taiwan. In Azerbaijan, home to nearly half of the world's onshore mud volcanoes, similar precursory activity has been documented before major seismic events. The April 2000 magnitude 6.1 Caspian Sea earthquake was preceded by 18 months of increased mud volcano activity, including the dramatic eruption of Lok Batan mud volcano that sent flames 300 meters into the air. Indonesia's Sidoarjo mudflow provides another sobering parallel. Triggered in 2006, it continues today, having displaced 60,000 people and submerged entire villages under meters of hot mud. What made Sidoarjo particularly concerning wasn't its initial eruption, but its persistence, a reminder that once underground pressure systems find pathways to the surface, stopping them can prove impossible. Examination of Taiwan's historical record reveals cycles within cycles. The island experiences clusters of mud volcano activity roughly every 15 to 20 years, with each cluster characterized by increasing frequency and intensity before apparent dormancy. But geologists have learned that dormancy doesn't mean stability. It often means the system is reorganizing itself for something larger. What makes the current situation particularly unsettling is the timeline compression. Historical clusters typically unfolded over decades. The current pattern at Wandan, 11 eruptions in 3.5 years, represents an acceleration that has no clear precedent in the available record. It's as if geological processes that once operated on human life scales are now operating on timeframes that individuals can witness and measure in real time. And now, scientists fear that history is not just repeating itself, but accelerating towards something unprecedented. Current danger level and new measurements. The numbers reveal a geological system operating outside historical norms. 11 eruptions in 3.5 years represents a 300% increase over the historical baseline. But the raw frequency tells only part of the story. Each eruption has released progressively more gas, opened larger vents, and demonstrated greater underground pressure. The November 12th eruption opened 5 separate vents simultaneously, the most ever recorded at any Taiwan mud volcano site. Taiwan's Central Weather Administration has quietly elevated monitoring protocols. Seismic stations that previously recorded data every hour now transmit measurements every minute. Satellite imagery updates have shifted from weekly to daily schedules. These aren't alarm measures, officials insist, but enhanced observation tools. The distinction matters less than the reality. Taiwan's geological surveillance network is tracking this region with the intensity usually reserved for active volcanic threats. The earthquake connection has become impossible to ignore. Since 2022, every significant mud volcano eruption in Pingtung County has occurred within 72 hours of seismic activity, measuring magnitude 4.5 or higher. The November 10th earthquake was followed not just by the Wandan eruption, but by increased gas emissions at 3 other sites: Yanchao, Sanmen, and Badushan. Dr. Sarah Williams, a structural geologist who has studied Taiwan's mud systems for 15 years, describes the regional response as unprecedented. We're witnessing synchronized behavior across geological features that were previously thought to operate independently, she explains. It suggests an underground system operating at larger scales than any current models predict. Satellite measurements show that the area around Wandan Township is rising at rates that have doubled since 2023. Ground uplift now averages 15 to 20 millimeters annually, compared to the regional background rate of 6 to 8 millimeters. More troubling is the pattern. Instead of gradual, uniform uplift, measurements show episodic inflation events that correlate with eruption activity. These ground movements translate into visible impacts. Building foundations in Wandan Township show stress fractures requiring repair every few months instead of every few years. County Road 185 has been resurfaced 4 times since 2023 due to persistent cracking. Water wells report pressure changes and chemistry variations, indicating deep underground fluids are moving in new directions. Local authorities have implemented enhanced awareness protocols, emergency contact lists updated monthly, evacuation routes clearly marked and regularly tested, gas monitoring equipment installed at strategic locations. While officials emphasize these measures are precautionary, residents understand they represent acknowledgement that the geological baseline has shifted. Perhaps most significantly, insurance companies operating in Taiwan have quietly begun adjusting coverage policies. Agricultural insurance rates have increased 15% since 2024, and new construction permits near mud volcano sites now require geological stability assessments that weren't previously mandated. The private sector has reached conclusions about future risk that haven't yet been formally announced by government agencies, because what happens next could rewrite our understanding of how the Earth warns us of danger. The system remains unstable and unpredictable. Scientists studying Taiwan's accelerating mud volcano patterns face a humbling truth. They're watching a system they don't fully understand prepare for something they can't accurately forecast. Dr. Sarah Williams puts it simply. We know these eruptions are connected to deeper processes. We know the frequency is increasing exponentially. What we don't know is whether we're watching a pressure release that will prevent larger earthquakes, or a pressure buildup that's warning us of something catastrophic. The uncertainty reflects the complexity of underground systems that tap into fluid reservoirs at multiple depths, interacting through fractured networks extending kilometers horizontally and vertically through geological formations. When one part changes, effects can propagate in directions and at rates that existing models don't predict. Recent geochemical analysis reveals that the source depths of erupted materials are changing over time. Early Wandan eruptions brought up shallow source materials from 1 to 2 kilometers depth. Recent events include increasing proportions of deep source fluids from formations exceeding 4 kilometers. This suggests eruption pathways are deepening and accessing previously isolated pressure systems, a development that could dramatically alter future activity. International comparisons offer both insights and concerns. Azerbaijan's mud volcano fields show that systems can operate in apparent stability for decades before rapid transitions to much higher activity levels. Indonesia's Sidoarjo mud flow, manageable in 2006, became a geological disaster, displacing 60,000 people and continuing today. Current estimates suggest it could flow for decades. Climate change adds variables scientists are only beginning to understand. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns can alter groundwater systems, feeding mud volcanoes. Sea level rise affects pressure balance in coastal aquifer systems, potentially destabilizing mud volcano systems stable for centuries. Local residents live with these uncertainties daily. Emergency kits are standard household equipment. Farmers plant crops with shorter growing seasons to reduce eruption losses. Some families maintain backup residences, not expecting catastrophic events, but understanding that probability landscapes have shifted in ways that make preparation prudent. Current modeling suggests that if present trends continue, Wandan could experience monthly eruptions within 2 years. But models are only as good as historical data, and current behavior falls outside historical precedent. The system could stabilize, continue accelerating exponentially, or transition to entirely different behavior patterns. All three scenarios remain scientifically plausible, with dramatically different implications. What seems certain is that old assumptions no longer apply. The geological baseline that guided previous generations of planning and risk assessment has shifted. The new baseline operates at higher energy levels, shorter timescales, and greater uncertainty. Communities across Taiwan are learning to live with geological systems that are not just active, but actively changing in real time. The ground beneath Taiwan isn't just restless, it's learning new behaviors, and that learning process is accelerating in ways that make prediction impossible and preparation essential. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and remember, the Earth always speaks before it shouts.